I found the unmarked envelope waiting for me on the counter, and some part of me already knew what it would say before I even tore it open. But I never could have guessed what it would lead to 3 days later. My husband and I had spent almost 2 years trying for a baby, and each month had started to feel like a quiet, private funeral I attended completely alone. He wasn't a bad man about it, not exactly. He just had a habit of rushing past the disappointment, already saying, "next time," before I'd even had a chance to feel the last one. So eventually, I stopped telling him when I tested at all. It was simpler that way. That particular afternoon, I opened the envelope still wearing my coat, saw the single line staring back at me, and set it face down on the counter before retreating to the bathroom floor. Cool tile, locked door, no one there to ask if I was fine. I let myself fall apart for about 20 minutes, then washed my face, fixed my mascara, and went downstairs to start dinner as if nothing had happened. That was Tuesday. By Thursday, I knew something else was wrong, something underneath the fertility stuff, something I'd been ignoring for weeks in the form of a dull pressure low in my abdomen. My doctor had an opening that same afternoon, so I went. She's the kind of physician who keeps family photos on her desk and somehow remembers your dog's name. And she'd been my doctor since I moved to this city 6 years earlier, right after my wedding. I had never once felt unsafe in her office until that day. She walked in, made the usual small talk about sleep and the weather, then pulled something up on her screen and went quiet in a way that wasn't like her at all. When I asked if everything was okay, she said she needed to ask me something and needed me to be completely honest. She turned the monitor toward me, and it took a full 10 seconds for my brain to catch up with what I was looking at. My blood work, my name at the top, 2 columns of hormone levels, one highlighted in yellow. She explained that my progesterone was almost undetectable, that this was likely why we hadn't been able to conceive, that it was treatable, but she wanted a full workup before discussing next steps. Then she paused and said there was something else, something that had popped up while she was pulling my chart, a second patient file still open behind mine. I couldn't see the name, but I could see the date of the last visit, 3 weeks earlier, and the reason for it, an OB intake, first trimester, 8 weeks along, and in the referring physician field was a name I recognized instantly. My husband's general practitioner, the same doctor he'd seen for years. She asked, very quietly, if there was something going on at home that she should know about. I want to be precise about what happened in my mind in that moment, because it wasn't some dramatic flash of clarity. It was more like the floor giving way 1 inch at a time. My husband's GP doesn't deliver babies. He doesn't send his own patients to an OB. The only reason his name would land in a referral field in my doctor's system is if he'd sent someone there, someone connected to our lives, someone who might have specifically sought her out because she was my doctor and they knew it, or maybe just stumbled onto her name without realizing the connection at all. I asked who the patient was. Of course she couldn't tell me, and I understood that. But the look she gave me, I will never forget. Not pity exactly, more like she was watching me assemble a puzzle she already knew the picture of, waiting to see if I'd need help with the final pieces. 8 weeks, she'd said. I counted backward in my head and landed right on our anniversary trip. The weekend we'd gone to the coast, just the 2 of us, supposedly to fix things between us, to keep trying. I picked up my purse, told her I'd call to schedule the blood work, and left. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 45 minutes and didn't cry once. I tend to go very methodical in shock, making lists, thinking in steps. Step 1, don't assume. Step 2, find out. The thing about 6 years of marriage is that you end up knowing things about your spouse they've forgotten, his passwords. Because he'd had me log into things for him 100 times and never bothered changing them. His email, his phone account, all of it. I got home before he did, sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and told myself I would find absolutely nothing, that this was a coincidence, that doctors refer people constantly. It took 11 minutes to find her. Her name wasn't even hidden. They'd clearly grown comfortable. Hundreds of messages stretching back 14 months. 14 months. Our last anniversary, the one I'd cooked his favorite meal for and spent 20 minutes picking out a card, had been 13 months earlier. He'd been involved with her longer than I'd been desperately trying to give him a child. Her name was Daniela, a client contact from his work, younger than me, living 20 minutes from our house, 8 weeks pregnant. I read enough of those messages to understand the whole shape of it. She believed he was going to leave me. He'd told her so, used the word soon something like 43 times across 14 months, and never once followed through. Her hope had clearly been thinning. Then, 6 weeks earlier, she'd emailed him with the subject line, "We need to talk," and he'd called her from a number I didn't recognize, a call that lasted an hour and 40 minutes. After that, his messages to her turned short and formal, like he was already rehearsing his exit. She was carrying his child, and he was quietly engineering how to make her disappear. I didn't confront him that night or the next day. I spent the whole weekend just thinking, which might sound cold, but I needed to know what I actually wanted instead of reacting on instinct. There's a version of this story where you blow everything up out of righteous fury and end up alone, broke, and more shattered than before. And I'd watched my own cousin live that version. I also found myself thinking about Daniela more than I expected to. She was 8 weeks pregnant, had been promised a future that was never coming, and was now watching the man she trusted go cold, right as she needed him most, abandoned mid-pregnancy because she'd become inconvenient. I can't pinpoint exactly when my anger stopped being only about him and started making room for her too, not because I'd forgiven anything, but because I knew exactly what it felt like to want a child so badly it reshaped your entire life, and I couldn't stomach the idea of her facing that alone because some man decided she was disposable. By Sunday night, I'd made up my mind. I found her email address buried in his contacts and wrote to her from an account she wouldn't recognize. No threats, no accusations, just the truth. "I know about you, I know about the baby, I'm not your enemy, and I'm available if you want to talk." I expected silence, or panic, or her forwarding it straight to him. Instead, she wrote back within 4 hours, saying she'd been waiting for something like this, that some part of her had sensed it was all about to collapse. We met at a coffee shop across town on a Tuesday morning. I arrived early, ordered tea, and my hands were steadier than I'd expected. She walked in looking exactly like her photos, except exhausted, carrying a tote bag with a pharmacy logo on it, wearing the particular composed expression of someone who's cried a great deal in private and gotten very practiced at hiding it. She told me almost immediately that she hadn't known he was married. He told her he was separated. I told her I believed her, that it sounded exactly like something he'd say. She laughed despite herself, and then she started crying. It wasn't some cinematic moment of instant sisterhood. It was messy, full of long silences, flashes of irrational anger toward her, even though I knew she hadn't known the truth at first, and moments where some small detail she mentioned about a work trip he'd taken landed like a gut punch I had to sit with quietly. But we talked for nearly 3 hours, and by the end, I had a complete picture, and so did she. She'd kept everything, every text, every voicemail, every email, photos, even the name of a friend of his who'd known and covered for him. Without realizing it, she'd built me an airtight case. When I eventually sat down with my attorney, she told me she'd rarely seen a file walk in this thoroughly documented on a first meeting. 3 weeks later, my husband came home on a Wednesday to find his key no longer worked. I'd already moved his belongings to his brother's house, not destroyed, though I'll admit I was tempted, because I kept thinking about Daniela needing financial stability and about being smart instead of merely satisfying. Everything was folded, packed, and labeled. On the front step, I left a single folder containing 1 sheet of paper, my attorney's name and number. He called 14 times that evening. I let everyone go to voicemail. He texted that it wasn't what I thought. I texted back that it was exactly what I thought, and to call my attorney. He had his mother call me, and I let that go to voicemail too. Not because I held anything against her, but because I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Here's something nobody warns you about discovering a betrayal like this. The grief arrives in waves, and some of those waves catch you off guard completely. I cried more over the fertility struggle than over him, over those 2 years of blaming my own body, feeling broken and inadequate, while he was off doing exactly what he was doing. The whole time, I had a treatable hormonal issue that no one caught because I kept postponing my own appointments, kept telling myself I was fine, kept pouring every ounce of energy into trying instead of actually taking care of myself. My body hadn't betrayed me. It just needed someone to look a little closer. I went back to my OB, completed the full workup, and we built a plan together. Near the end of that visit, she asked, gently, how I was really doing, and I told her everything. What I'd discovered, that I was now in the middle of a divorce. She admitted she hadn't been sure how much I'd pieced together that day in her office. I told her I'd gotten there eventually, all of it. She just nodded and told me I'd be okay, in a tone that made it sound like she genuinely meant it, not like something people say out of habit. Before she started showing, Daniela relocated to be near her sister, her choice entirely, and one I respected, since she needed a support system untangled from all of this. My husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, did not handle any of it with grace. He tried to dispute the timeline, minimize things, reshape the narrative, and his attorney clearly had a difficult job ahead. The divorce dragged on for 8 months, ugly at points, but I had documentation he never knew existed, and Daniela had given a statement about the relationship's timeline that my attorney called unusually candid and genuinely pivotal to the settlement. He walked away with far less than he'd anticipated. I walked away with the house, which surprised me, since I hadn't originally wanted it, until I looked out at the garden I'd been nurturing for 4 years and realized, no, this one belongs to me. It's been just over a year since I sat in that parking garage and didn't shed a single tear. I went back for a checkup last month, and my levels are better than they've been in years. We've talked through what might come next, on my own terms, in my own time. I still think about Daniela sometimes. I don't have her number anymore. She changed it when she moved, but through a mutual acquaintance, I heard she had a daughter, and that she's doing well, that she's not alone. I'm genuinely glad about that, which surprised me at first, but doesn't anymore. Here's the part nobody tells you about surviving betrayal. The person who hurt you doesn't get to remain the main character of your recovery. You don't owe your healing to your anger at them. You're allowed to simply move forward and let them fade into the background. He's out there somewhere, no doubt telling himself some softened version of events where he's the misunderstood one, the one who just made mistakes. That story is his to carry, not mine. I have a garden. I have a doctor I trust. I have a treatment plan and a future I'm genuinely excited about for the first time in longer than I can remember. I walked into that appointment terrified something was wrong with me, and it turned out something was. Just not the thing I'd spent 2 years blaming myself for. I used to believe the hardest part of that entire year was the waiting. The monthly tests, the quiet letdowns, training myself to feel nothing for 48 hours afterward. Looking back now, that wasn't the hardest part at all. The hardest part was the story I kept telling myself, that I was the problem, that my body was failing both of us, that if I just tried a little harder or waited a little longer or wanted it quietly enough, everything would eventually fall into place. What I understand now is that truth surfaces whether or not you're prepared for it. I didn't walk into that appointment looking for answers about my marriage. I went because my body had finally gotten loud enough that I couldn't ignore it any longer. And somehow, in the middle of a routine visit, the entire structure of the life I thought I had quietly came apart. Not because anyone was careless, not because some cosmic force was punishing me, but because things that are real have a way of eventually surfacing, no matter how carefully someone tries to bury them. I still think often about the choice I made with Daniela, and it was never an easy one. Part of me wanted to direct all that fury at her, wanted someone closer and more reachable to absorb the blow, but I kept returning to one simple fact. She hadn't chosen any of this either. She'd been lied to as well, and she was pregnant and watching herself get slowly abandoned, and I knew exactly what it felt like to want something desperately and feel it slip out of reach. I refused to become one more person who let her down. choosing to sit across from her, to actually listen, that remains the thing I'm proudest of from that entire chapter, not because it was some moral triumph, but because it forced me to be bigger than my own anger. It forced me to ask what kind of person I wanted to be when no one was watching and nothing about the situation was fair. There's no easy answer to that question, but I've learned that the moments you're most tempted to take the low road are exactly the moments that end up defining you. My husband chose the low road at every single fork, lying, stalling, quietly trying to erase himself from Daniela's life the second she became inconvenient. And every one of those choices kept compounding until by the time everything surfaced, there was no version of the story that made him look good. Not because I'd engineered it that way, but because that's simply what happens when dishonesty keeps piling up. I got the house. I got my health back. I got a treatment plan and a future I actually want to walk into. Daniela got her daughter, her sister, and a fresh start somewhere untangled from all of it. My ex-husband got precisely the life his choices built for him. None of it luck, none of it magic, just the natural outcome of what each of us decided to do when everything fell apart. I chose to stay clear-headed and honest and to keep moving forward even while devastated. He chose to keep lying and hoping the wreckage would somehow sort itself out. Those two roads never lead anywhere near each other. They never do. I still live in that house. The garden has never looked better. And most mornings now, I wake up feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Like my life actually, finally, belongs to me.